Today, I'm going to be starting in my next world building sketchbook. I'm not 100% done here. I've got some stuff to patch up, but for video purposes, I think I've finished everything here that I want to finish and record. And the reason for that is a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be finishing off is going to be things that are going to require either a lot of kind of fiddly time or just things that are not going to be quite as entertaining potentially or educational. And frankly, on a selfish note, it's going to be just nice for me to put on some music and like listen and finish things out. The sketchbook is mostly done now. It's got pretty much, 95% of stuff is filled. I can show you a little bit of the stuff that still needs to be polished. I've got a couple pages here that need to work out, but I'm going to have to do some analysis for those and probably some referential work. And I might record that. I want to do something on working from reference when you're world building. But this kind of end piece of the sketchbook is basically all that needs to be finished. Everything else is, tons of just mostly finished. Oh, yeah, I've got a page of swords. But again, I don't think that's particularly interesting. So this sketchbook is as finished as I want it to be before moving on to the next one. And there is some logic in not finishing it completely and moving on. I like having several buckets open simultaneously. I like working on several things at different times because I find for myself, if I get bored on a thing or stressed or anxious and I don't have something else to bounce to, I will often just stop. So I would recommend that if you find yourself in a similar position, that you take similar precautions to make sure that you have other resources, other things to jump to. So this one is almost a closed chapter. I'm really excited for doing the last, kind of review of it and showing all of you everything. And I'll probably do a variety of videos there because some of it will be specifically on like the highlights and things that I learned, how it adapted to my writing, what I took in and what I didn't, what modified things. But then also I kind of want to do it in a storytelling sense. I want to talk about the elements and how they actually tie into my world. So stay tuned for that. But let's go ahead then and move on to this guy, which is going to be the next world building sketchbook that I'm working on. And before I actually get started drawing in here today, I want to talk about some ideas, some reflections, and some choices that I'm going to make moving forward. So right off the bat, you can probably see here, it's labeled World Building Alcohol Markers. Now in this prior sketchbook, everything I did was either pen and ink, there was one page that was watercolor, and everything else was basically these guys, these twin tip brush pens, and I love them. So if I love them, why am I not using them for the next sketchbook? Well, because there's a chance that using something like this, that is going to allow for a lot more subtle shading, that's going to allow for more gradation, that is going to allow for more subtle, softer tones, might be a better resource. Now, I will be honest, I do not like using alcohol markers nearly as much as I like my brush pens, but I have to allow, at least right now, for the fact that that might just be because I'm less familiar with them. We will see how I adapt. And I am leaving myself open the possibility of switching if I decide I hate working with these guys. This is also going to facilitate another change. These guys tend to bleed through pages, which means when I work in this sketchbook, I will only be working on the right-hand pages, right here. That is a big adjustment. I have rather enjoyed how this sketchbook has allowed me to do two-page spreads. That's been a lot of fun. And I'm a little bit bummed about that transition, and we will see if it's worth it. There's a good chance it won't be. I have also toyed around with the potential idea of gluing pages together. I could easily work here and here, and then these two pages could glue them together so that I can continue to do two-page spreads. We'll see. I will set myself up for that at the beginning and try to decide if it's a good option or not. I haven't made that decision yet. The reason I'm talking about all this is I think the framing of moving into a sketchbook like this can be very important. And that's kind of the first point, the first thing that I want to discuss and talk about as we get started here. I am not going in here with no ideas about what I want to do and how I want to work. I think having absolute freedom can honestly be incredibly daunting as an artist. And if that is not the case for you, dive in. But if you are admitting or saying that that's not the case for you, then I think from my perspective, what you are saying is you never struggle or very seldom struggle to come up with an idea or dive into a project. You don't dive into projects and then find that you halt because your expectations are different or you get disappointed or something. If that's you, wonderful. This doesn't apply to you in quite the same way it's going to apply to most people. I find that if you limit yourself, if you give yourself a set of rules that you have to follow, a medium or mediums that you can use, different topics that you have to stay inside of, whatever that might be, you are going to give yourself some guide rails. It's going to allow you to continue working in this realm and in this field, and it's going to give you something to lean back on when you do hit those moments of having to make difficult decisions. And I think this is all the more apt when working on world building, which is basically an entire drawing and art style that is reflective of decision making. You are making decisions about a world, about how people live, about what people are and what constitutes a people in that place, about geography, about science, about physics. There are so many decisions to make that I find it can often be really beneficial to limit other decisions. I'm not going to be deciding on each one of these illustrations what medium I want to use. I'm going to be using alcohol markers. I'm going to be starting a lot of my drawings with a pencil, and I'm going to be finishing in a lot of details with my pens. That is going to be my marching orders as I move into this. And if I decide to modify them later, that is totally fine. I am, after all, the artist, and I can make those calls about my own artwork. It doesn't make a lot of sense to set up rules for myself because they're beneficial and stick to them when they stop being beneficial. So that's kind of the first thing I'd like to say there. The next is I think it's good to reflect on the last work, to take a look at this guy and see what went well, what didn't go well. There are some things that I want to reflect on there for a moment. The first is probably that the thing I enjoyed most about this sketchbook was consistency. The fact that it gave me a single location to put everything. Obviously, that's going to simultaneously be the case with another sketchbook. Something I didn't like is these first couple pages and the first couple batches of drawing were quite different stylistically. I rather enjoyed once I ran into a consistent style. The fact that all of these pages kind of match each other, it starts to read. I don't like pages like this, which was a page specifically done for a video, and it's not necessarily pertaining to the other things in here. There are several batches of this. I know how other sketchbooks or loose Bristol paper to use for those purposes. That's something I'm going to be evacuating from the new sketchbook moving forward. I've really enjoyed the 2-page spreads, which I already mentioned, so I'm going to be looking into if there's a way to do that, but I'm not going to marry myself to that attitude. And I love the iterative nature. I love working on things, bouncing around, trying new ideas, and I love working on a bunch of drawings at one point. I think it was beneficial that I allowed myself to have a difference of finishing states, that some of these drawings are just pencil and ink, some are all three, some are just brush pen and ink, some are not even finished because they don't pertain, they don't need to be further developed. Certain things are colored, certain things are not colored. I like that I've allowed myself those things. Those are traits that I'm going to pull into the next sketchbook. Overall, this has been a really lovely experience. It's been really enjoyable, and I'm really excited to start moving back through my editing process in the novels because now I have illustrations for all these locations. And that brings up the next thing that I want to talk about with this next sketchbook, which is what am I going to put in it? And this comes straight back to the novels, to the story that is taking place in the world I am building. I have started re-editing the beginning of the first novel, and I'm working with a small group of people who are taking a peek at it with me and helping me on some of those steps and some of the journey that needs to happen for me as a writer. The perhaps most distressing thing that I've run into so far in that from a world building standpoint is, for whatever reason, the locations that the story starts in are not represented in my prior world building sketchbook. So I probably started that sketchbook after I had been writing for long enough that I was focusing my drawing and my art on the locations that were either most interesting to me or they were the locations that I was dealing with at that point in the story. But the story starts in this little border town called Harlan on the edge of Mullane, which is the windswept plains, which I've spent a lot of time working on in that world building sketchbook. And then very quickly, in fact, in the second chapter or end of the first chapter, goes into the desert of Aura. and to this giant city beneath a stone that collects the dew every morning and drains the water down into these massive vats underneath the city in order to provide water for the community. That awesome place is not represented right now in my world building sketchbook. And so as I continue to go editing, I want to equip myself with information, both physical and artistic, that is going to help me move through that editing process and the writing process. Because once you've drawn something out, it's very easy then to go back and look at those illustrations as you're writing, as you're telling your story. And this is also something I'm thinking about as I kind of explore the idea of working with Dungeons and Dragons again, at potentially putting down some of these worlds, is having a drawing, an illustration, even if it's very simple, can give you so much more as you're describing, whether in written form or in analog audio form like I am right now. Those things will be beneficial. So what am I going to be exploring in this sketchbook? And am I going to be using a similar strategy where I have, 8 pages that are going to be dedicated to this region and then 8 pages dedicated to this region, etc. I am going to try to follow that strategy again, and I'm going to be exploring a different set of regions from what I did in the prior sketchbook. So I am going to start with Aura, which I actually have these. You see this is not like a pretty sketchbook in a traditional sense. I've already taped things to the front of it because I need to remember them. So I'm going to be working on Oris and Aura, which are those desert places, and I'm going to be trying to develop those. I'm going to be working on Sunauchi, which is the other gigantic forest, the one that isn't modeled after the redwood forests on the Pacific Northwest, but is going to be modeled more after the Amazon rainforest. So that'll be fun and very reference heavy, because those trees are very different than the ones that I've been drawing. So I'm going to be working heavily on deciduous trees for that. It'll be good. It's very present in the first novel. I'll be working on the Greenlands, which is this kind of just area up north that is around this area of waterfalls. The Brownlands, which is this area that's been burned out magically and nothing really grows there, and the people that survive there. It's kind of like the Old West. It'll be fun. The Cleft Lands, which are next to Hyoku, which if I go back and reference in here really quickly, we've got, oh, come on. You can see Hyoku here is built on this giant bluff. And then, but there's a land over here to the side that is all of these kind of Grand Canyon-y areas. And there's this tribe of people that live there that don't talk. They communicate entirely by sign language. They're incredibly tall. They're probably humans, but we don't know. And there's really strange creatures, giant spiders and whatnot, that live in the Cleftlands. So that'll be kind of fun to explore, especially the creatures. I'm excited about that. I'll be exploring Remora, which is the oceans. I'll be exploring Ashlar, which is kind of the present-day remnants of the Atlantis in my world. Most of the Atlantis civilization, Helgrim, was totally destroyed. The survivors found another island and made this kind of rich community. That'll be fun to explore and give me the ability to work with robots and things like that. Spirak is the floating city. That one will be fun. I've done a little bit of work on that in the past, but not a ton. I'm going to be exploring some maps, other ancient civilizations, banners, dragons, Darvos, which are kind of a pseudo-dragon in my world. And I actually have another sketchbook that I haven't begun yet, but I'm going to begin very soon, which is just creatures, and that's going to be exciting. And then down here I have something for me that is just a good reminder, which is, as I was, again, reading through Tolkien's work and kind of thinking about, why did he get started on his novels? What drove him to write his novels? Because I think a lot of people are just he was a Catholic dude, and so he wanted to tell a Catholic tale. And I really don't think that's true at all. The way that he describes it is he said, I'm a storyteller, and I wanted to try my hand at a really long story. He had dedicated his life toward unearthing, translating, and working with archaic storytelling and things like Beowulf, And so the idea of I work with these things, I want to tell my own, makes total sense. But the reasons that kind of pulled him in were language and myth. He loved the idea of mythology and legends, and he loved language, and he loved playing with it. We call him a philologist, a person who was incredibly invested in language. He built a lot of his own languages. He spoke several languages. He studied a lot of languages. And so immediately I wanted to think about, okay, for me, what is it? What is it for me that kind of pulls me in? And I think the world building for me really comes down to geography, food, and agriculture. I love the places themselves. I love thinking about rivers and mountains and hills and plateaus and things like that. And I love thinking about the plants. I love thinking about what people eat, the kinds of ecosystems that would be produced in this fantasy world, and how people would live there. I have spent a lot of time studying and doing some small amounts of like homesteading. We've raised pigs and chickens and ducks and sheep, and we kind of live out in the boonies. I've had massive gardens in the past. When we first got married, my wife and I, we had this tiny little garden, and slowly over the years, as much space as I've had, I kind of just keep expanding. And I love having my hands in the earth. I really want to be a little bit more like Samwise Gamgee. So for me, those pieces are a huge element of getting involved in the world. Now, it's more complicated than that, in the same way that it was for Tolkien. But I find that for me, the geography, the way the world is structured, is so intriguing. And when I try to build cities, a lot of my cool fantasy cities are, what if we put a city inside a volcano? What if we found a way to make a city in a desert that could actually like have enough water? What if we built, a city above a really crazy, terrible, evil kind of jungle? How would that work? What if you build a city below the waves or above the waves up in the sky? Those kinds of questions are often what inspire and lead to discovery and adventure when it comes to fantasy. And so I want to be aware of that the whole time. Now, these probably won't stay stuck on the entire time. Well, actually, who am I kidding? They probably will, because I'll forget about it and I won't notice them after a while. But when I'm finally done with this, they'll probably come off and get taped somewhere on the interior. They are reminders for me. This is not pretty. If I was making this for YouTube specifically, there's a lot of things I would have done differently here. I would have staged it. I'd have the camera coming from a different angle, yada, yada, yada. This is almost entirely for me. This is a way for me to understand, remember what is important when I work on this. Because there's enough stress already when it comes to world building, especially if it's something close to your heart. And so these are reminders for me. So anyway, that is kind of the blanket ideas and concepts for what I'm aiming for here, my reflections on my prior one, and my goals here. I have done nothing in this sketchbook yet. I don't even have the note to myself, which I often write at the beginning. These are all blank pages. And if I'm being honest with you right now, my heart rate is increasing, because I, probably like many of you, am having that initial, oh crap, that's a blank page. What do I do? And that's a real thing. So I think, to do myself a service, and honestly, just to be honest and authentic, I am going to give myself maybe 5 or 10 minutes to just kind of sift through this first page. And I'm not going to narrate, and I'm going to speed it up a little bit. And this was not something I planned, but I'm coming up with this right now as it kind of pertains to taking care of myself. And after I do that, then we'll chat a little bit more, and I'll probably do some more drawing on top of that. But for the next 5 or 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to kind of get some marks in this thing so I feel less stressed about it. And if you are also in a similar, place, there's nothing wrong with that. It's very, very normal. So let's go ahead and we'll start making some marks here. All right, well, I've got kind of my first few marks here, and things are going off okay to begin with. Like I mentioned, I'm not nearly as comfortable with the alcohol markers as I am with the brush pens, and the layering back and forth seems to be a little bit of a different endeavor. It seems like things bleed a little bit more. We're already getting some bleeding coming through that page, so yeah, I don't know exactly how that's going to work. I've got some ideas in my mind, but I certainly don't want to work on things on one page and then have it destroy the stuff on the other page. That seems to be not a particularly optimal way to work. So I'm going to have to kind of refine certain portions of my workflow to make that make sense. And the pens that I use don't seem to as immediately complement this kind of work in the same way that they have in the past. And so it will be a learning experience for me. It'll be a good experience for me to learn some new things about my mediums and figure out how they work and how I can best utilize them. And this is an important thing for me because I very much have a tendency to just get comfortable with a thing and stick with it. And often I learn a lot about my processes and about how I'm approaching things when I allow myself the freedom to try new things. And yeah, it's not my favorite, if I'm being totally honest. I love collecting new materials. I kind of love trying out new materials, and I hate committing to new materials. I am pretty apprehensive about change in general. In fact, my daughter just a day or two ago brought me a library book I think she had gotten that was, I think it was literally called like Change is Good or Change Can Be Good. And she's like, you need this, Daddy, because you don't like change. I was like, you're right. I don't know if it's a great thing that you at 6 years old are metabolizing that already. And I hope I'm not like putting any of that on her, but it was very cute and very funny. And it's also very true. I struggle with change. I like things often the way that they are. And, you know, obviously it's not always the case because when things aren't great, you know, I kind of get the punk rocker in me comes out and is like, nah, just burn it all down. And, you know, I'm older now, so I don't oscillate as badly as I used to. But when I was younger, I did kind of oscillate between those two. Like, I'm doing this because this is the way I've always done it. And then, you know, the next week it's like, I'm never doing that again because that's the way that I had always done it. That's not a very easy way to live. But fortunately, getting a little bit closer to 40, I don't have quite as many of those traits that I did when I was younger. I've got different traits that I kept from my punk rock years, and that is something we can talk about in a future video if we need to. But I am happy that I had the idea of starting really to actually work in here for the first time by not trying to talk at the same time, because it didn't feel anxiety inducing. It felt just fine to sit here and be like, okay, like, no, I'm allowed to work on whatever, and I'm allowed to work at whatever pace, and I don't need to narrate things as I go about it. And I am no martyr. I am not going to sit here and try to be like, woe is me because I have to do this. Like, no, I get to do this. This is a cool thing that I get to do. But it is a little bit harder to try and narrate what you're doing while you're doing it. Maybe some of you really don't struggle with that, but I often do. Like when I was teaching, if I tried to like write on the board at the same time I was talking to my students, I would always forget words, like leave them out. So you would look up my writing and be like, you know, Mr. Feldman, like you left out an and. Like, oh crap, yeah, I did. And it just silly things like that. But the brain, at least my brain, struggles to keep up with all those things simultaneously. So what I'm working on right here is the city of Orus, or Orus Rock, and it is just a desert city that is built underneath a giant monolithic stone that is actually part of a series of stones. And I think that it kind of has the appearance of this like devil's backbone kind of structure where there's just a ton of these kind of pillars coming out. I think actually it would probably be worthwhile illustrating that. So I'm going to come down to the bottom of the page here. And yeah, let's say like we had like this is the surface of the desert. And maybe we'll do like Oris right here. So maybe we'll do it small so that we can actually have an ability to work with this. So like this is Oris rock. And I kind of like the idea of it being, oh, we could even extend this over that way because on the first page we can. I kind of like the idea of it being like there's just these stones that come out at pretty regular intervals and they are all in a line. You know, I don't know how they are on the map. I think on a north, south, east, west, all of these kind of go this direction. I think that's kind of how the range of these goes. But I like the idea of there being just a series of these. And then, of course, me being me, I'm like, well, then, like, we should really have one that is much bigger than our normal one because, you know, you don't want to focus everything on, like, the most iconic and interesting. You just want to have, you know, you want to have other things to look forward to. But the idea that there's stories that people tell about this being the skeleton of some mighty creature. Is it really like, you know, I can make that decision as the storyteller, but my characters don't know because it's not relevant to them at this particular point, whether that's true or not. So I do find with the alcohol markers that my point, what is it, 0.2? Yeah, my 0.2 millimeter, I vastly prefer. The marks seem to blend a little bit better. I don't know what it is. I don't know why these guys seem to me to be so different. And I might actually layer some of those on top. Also, I forgot to mention this earlier. I have heard from multiple people that colored pencil layer really well on top of these guys. So I have gotten all my colored pencils out. I got a few new ones for Christmas, and I will be playing with those guys on top of here too. The problem there is that the colored pencil work takes a long time. And very seldom am I working on the world building stuff to an illustrative level. I'm not usually trying to get full illustrations done with this medium. So we'll see. I don't know if I'll be doing a ton of that, but probably here and there. Probably for illustrations where either something failed and I need to like fix things, or you know, if I really want to put a lot of time into building something too. So I'm mostly just on this first page. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm doing. And once I have a little bit of momentum, I am sure that I will start going and researching things like cacti and succulents and some creatures. I don't have a ton of animals so far that I've thought about here. In the first couple chapters, there are katydids, there are crickets, there are scorpions, there are snakes, and there's Darvos, which are these like pseudo dragons that live underneath the sands. They live all over the whole world, but here they live beneath the sands. So I'll probably get an excuse to draw one of them, which will be kind of fun. I'm basing those primarily off monitor lizards, and I think that'll be a fun thing to play with. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to be fairly different here. At this point, it's pretty normal to feel a little overwhelmed, and I do, but I'm also excited because I love starting new things. It's the sticking to them that's hard for me. So I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping this up, though, because we are getting far enough in, and I'm going to spend some time working on these illustrations by myself, solidifying some of what I want to do, and when we come back for the next episode, I will let you know if there's any new decisions I've made, if there's anything that I've thought about that I'm going to change in how I'm working. But I am excited for this, and I hope you will come along for the journey. And if you are starting a new sketchbook of some kind, I would love to hear about it. And I would love more for you to be able to show me your new world building stuff. If you're comfortable doing that, we have a world building channel in the Discord server. And yeah, it'd be a good opportunity to kind of show off your work, get some critique on it if you're looking for it, or probably more likely just have other people who are excited about the same things you are, which is always a good thing for the psyche. Always good to know that you're not alone, that other people are excited about similar things that you are. All right. Well, thanks for being here, everybody. Thanks for hearing me out. I hope that the first part of this episode in particular was beneficial for you as you start moving forward on your work. Thank you to my patrons as well, who are on the screen right now. If you'd like to check out the Patreon, you can feel free to do so. It is linked down in the description below next to the Discord servers link. It mostly gives you access to some updates here and there, sometimes some extra videos. Usually they're updates on what I'm doing and my studio setup and things like that. But the biggest thing is just if you enjoy what I do here, it gives you the ability to support that, to give me just a little bit of financial help to be able to purchase materials and such. But don't ever feel obligated. I mention it because it is helpful when it occurs, but it is always your prerogative, and I will try as hard as I can not to be pressuring with it. All right. All that stuff said. Have a good one, y'all. Thanks for being here. Have a good one.